Alright, here I am in the third turn of November 1914, and, well, the Germans made two more of these massive manpower assaults. A slight change in what I've been doing. I threw in, because I think the French defenses are getting heavier, I threw in some supply points, but not all, to hit certain target numbers. One of the attacks was here. This did not go at all well. The French managed to not retreat, and therefore do a decent amount of damage back, like 5 points to the Germans. The French armies are getting bigger, which means it's really hard to move them without the supplies. If I had supplies to run this offensive, I could keep punching forward, but I think the offensive is halting now. I really do. I don't think I have the supply points. I'm just not getting the trade-offs that I like, which is a shame because I would like to keep attacking where there are no trenches. It means that if we settle down and entrench over the winter or whatever, we're going to have this. Both of us have masses of supply points. Great. The French have been able to supply their defenses because I've been making some few German attacks. But also, the you have to break through the trenches to get into this kind of situation, which is kind of neat. And I just don't think the Germans are getting an advantage out of the attacks right now. Of course, the question is, do they want to be on the offensive later? Whoever is on the offensive is going to pay the bigger price. This was the part of the war where it's mobile, and now it really does stick down to attrition warfare, where the only thing that's going to force attacks is probably the accumulation of supply points for that. However, the Germans did manage to break a space here, which is kind of interesting. They took the trench line here. And maybe that'll weaken things enough that they can keep going. The trench lines are actually kind of weak because I've got to put all the force here. So now maybe I can expand in this direction. There's no great advantage to this because I'm not taking advantage of unentrenched French units. But there are so few that it almost seems desirable to keep attacking even along the trench line. Widen that front, maybe shorten it as well. Shorten it in terms of I'm widening the bulge and shortening because there's a counter bulge here for the French. So each hex I take on here kind of adds more units to both sides. But if the French are losing more than the Germans, it works out okay. And they did on that attack. If you win an attack, you come out with less losses. So I've skipped reporting on the French turn because really nothing significant is happening. They're just reacting to the breakthroughs. And those breakthroughs were becoming slower and more painful. So, for example, another attack on the trench lines here, that failed, and the Germans took significantly heavier casualties because of the failure than they would otherwise. Of course, the French took heavier casualties for not retreating, but not as much as the Germans took heavier, right? And then over here, though, the Germans... and I was about to give up until this, but the Germans managed to make their way across the Marne. And, beginning to curve around or invest Paris a little more heavily. If they can push into the suburbs or break the line across here. This was a position which wasn't yet entrenched, but would be at the end of the month. And now the whole Marne line is kind of at risk because of that. And the question, of course, is how do the Allies want to react? Do they want to create this huge bulge, which might actually be possible to cut off, but it looks too thick? The historical German bulge wasn't as broad-based as this, and even that couldn't be cut. It is an enticing prospect. Or do you want to pull back, shorten your line, and increase your defenses and make it almost impossible to attack? But here's the problem. It would be harder to attack the Germans the more we condense. Because how the Germans are being able to be successful is they're able to put their entire army against a weak spot or a perceived weak spot in the line, or a huge, not the entire army, but a huge focus of their army, yet still keep enough defenses that the French can't return that, and especially without supplies. So it's kind of you're seeing how it plays out, and you say to yourself, damn, I don't know, do I defend territory? Do I shorten my line? If this were World War II in Russia, I would certainly shorten my line. But it feels like it's mostly holding. I don't want to lose Paris, though. One note I want to make, I know when I explain the rules, I explain this. You don't have to have stacks this big. First of all, you've got the charts to keep them on. You've got quart units if you want to use. I find these things kind of mechanically more challenging, but these big stacks could be a problem for other people, and they're not trivial for me, especially with the slick counters. But one thing I actually violate, or not specifically because I do try to follow the rules on it, but the rules state, hey, if you put a strength point loss marker, it counts for everything under it. That's too complex for me, again, mentally to handle, same as the core displays or the other things. I'm able to make decisions quicker if I've got everything right out in front of me. So I've got a reduction marker on everything here. There's only going to be, 6 units in a stack, but I've got a marker on each one of those 6, so it comes out to a dozen. And that, it's a little more painful, but I find it easier to work that way. Just in case you had a question about the big stacks, they're not a necessity at all. In fact, playing by the rules suggestions, they just shouldn't happen. Well, both sides have run out of ammunition and supplies again, but we continue on with the offensive, of course. An attack here failed to dislodge. Attritional losses approximately equal. Same up here against the trench line. I think additional attack here, also attritional, but there was a successful furthering of the line across the Marne, just breaking through there, and that is Germans cutting across there. You win some, you lose some. Basically, where there are entrenchments, it's really tough to beat people here. I was hoping to knock that out before it got entrenched. That's perhaps still going to be possible. We've still got some of November left before that entrenchment is completed. Likewise, I was hoping, this is entrenched, but I was hoping to roll it and help shorten the line. Ignoring the Brits, and they're largely ignoring the Germans, although that may change because the Germans are halved now, but they still have big stacks. It's tough to move a big stack. Maybe I can strip some of the Brits, but then if they're weak, they're easy to attack and knock out. Even with the entrenchments, it's quite possible to hit anything that's, below about 6 strength. And the Brits don't have a lot more than that. Their big advantage is they have the ammo to get their full strength in play. Now both the French and Germans are completely out of supplies. So, it's kind of back where it was before, except it is harder to dislodge forces with less casualties because the more troop body, the harder it is to move. So you do lower damage. They're doing lower damage back, but you're getting basically these attritional results that I'm talking about, where you might be doing more damage, but you're not going to do significantly more because you can't force that retreat effect on them. So here, after the French have dressed their lines and tried to account for this little bulge that's occurring down here, which was the only German breakthrough, as well as strengthening this position a little bit. That's kind of exposed up there. We're at the end of the Schlieffen Plan scenario itself. Now, obviously, I'm going to keep going, and I'll keep going on this video as well, just to finish up the month, because I don't think a lot's going to happen. You may see some German minor breakthroughs like this one. This is kind of weak in this salient down here. But beyond that, I don't think there's going to be anything major changing here. Just maybe a few little hex changes as the fortifications start to take place that are in there. When we calculate out the points, this is the total of the French and British demoralization points. The French at 623, the British at 73. And then for the Germans, we subtract off 242. And we come to a basic of 454 difference. Now, 454 is a decisive German victory. We've caused a lot of casualties by pushing the supplies well beyond their limits. That seems to actually work too well for the Germans by my guesstimate. Of course, also, the whole situation with the Belgians throws this into a lot of question, because I'm not fighting anything at all like the historical, nor what the game's current situation, current revision of the rules allows for. But the rule book I have, which is apparently, I guess, the last printed rule book for this particular, that was included in this particular edition of the game, is rather clear that these Belgians can just be ignored. Certainly for the Schlieffen Plan, and I assume the old Schlieffen Plan rules were the same way. Well, that's a decisive victory, but we get a modification to that of 2 more levels, because the German units are within 2 hexes of any 3 Paris hexes at the end of the turn. They're not quite, are they? They didn't quite make that. No. Yeah, they are. They're within... There are only 3 Paris hexes as far as I can see, unless you count the suburbs, in which case they're definitely there. But yeah, they've got that. Is this a defeat for France? Well, the game says no. And if you think about France's activities, evacuating Paris, moving the government out, essentially. They left the people there, of course. You don't care about them. But they moved the government out of Paris in order to continue the war if Paris fell. So I'm going to keep going. I'm enjoying the game so far, and I don't want to just bail on it. I want to get some feeling for how things change as we get to trench warfare, etc. I'm not impressed with arguments that I've seen on another person's AAR saying there just aren't enough troops to run to the sea early. I feel like there are. You spread that out, and your enemy has to spread out to that too. And the question is when it happens. It's really a choice matter. You don't have to follow and send the bulk of your army, as the Schlieffen Plan suggested, to try to cut around. And, you know, looking at this, you get a pretty good result from that, from making the charge for the sea early and not allowing that really ugly bulge to form that, you know, cuts you into Belgium while you're near Paris. Okay, continuing on into past the Schlieffen Plan deadline and into later November. And there's nothing to really stop out of supply attacks continuing. The Germans have actually gained a couple of hexes here. They gained more next to the Paris suburbs and another space here, continued their attacks up here without gaining anything there. But, you know, they're still causing more casualties than they're taking. I'm not sure when winter comes. Suppose I probably ought to look that up, but it wouldn't have any effect here because all it affects is supplies. And we don't use any of that anyway. Starts in December, first turn of December, and ends after February. So, weather doesn't really have a lot of effect here, especially once you're out of supply. The Germans can continue their fun ad infinitum as far as I can see. And it just feels a little funky with that. I don't feel like there's any incentive. In fact, there's a strong disincentive to halting and digging in. In other games, winter or spring or whatever are so painful that you don't necessarily want to launch your offensives there, and you follow the more historical pattern. Here, while there's no real desire to do so other than, hey, they're digging in. I can break up their formation, their front line, and they can't eventually, right now they could, they can't dig in except right on the front line. That's kind of a weird situation. Alright, well, we'll see what the Allies can do, but there's another weird situation which may be fixed in later rules editions, but in the one that you'd get with this scenario, you end up, there's no replacement points for the end of November. November 5th turn is the last turn that you get replacement points. Until you start getting them, it's specified in December. After November, they start coming at a regular rate for then or for more. But it also states the specified replacement supply points only work until November 5th. So there's kind of two turns that are in some sort of vague limbo. I don't feel like going to the computer and trying to search and find out if that's the case, but it's going to overall impact the French, who are out of replacement points at this point, more than it will the Germans. Such as, and the offensive doesn't end. In fact, it's become more intense with the lack of ammunition in some ways. The Germans gained this hex, making their line a little more solid. This was up against some British units too, which were supplied, well, one British division which was in supply, and some French. The French were wiped out. I figure it's easier to keep the British in supply right now. We'll see for how long. But as long as they've got, 17, the French are only getting 15 every month. The British should stay alive because they help strengthen the defenses significantly. Elsewhere against the French, though, things failed. Bang. I think against this, and then again against the trenches here. Got to fill in the gaps. And that will be pretty much it for the month. I'll probably load this up without further speaking. So I'm just going to be rearranging what little French there are to try to fill in and strengthen the gaps. Mainly, I got to try to get that increased, which, of course, is going to draw troops off somewhere else. Because I don't really have anything anywhere left without reserves having come in this turn. Alright, well, I do have a little bit more to speak about. I pulled a few more French off the line here, just shifting it a little bit further away from there. I'm pretty much at the minimal, like 1 unit per hex here. And if the Germans had anything here, they would be attacking. But after the Germans stripped stuff off, they're not terribly strong there. They might be able to hit some of these corner spaces, though. And we might start seeing attacks in the mountains there, perhaps. I don't know. Anyway, up this one goes, and we'll start our way into December of 1914. See whether the winter has any surprises for us. I looked at the rules before, and it didn't look very promising, though, in terms of changing the nature of warfare enough to convince the Germans to stop attacking. They've got the advantage right now, and they might as well just keep grinding away. They're doing more damage than they're taking, and I'm not sure. That certainly would happen if the Allies attack them, but the impetus of their attack just has not stopped yet. All right, up it goes.